They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I'm really saying genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are mourn, just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Oh, welcome to Rogue Ways, where tonight we're going to have so much fun with a guest who has been featured on all kinds of networks and publications across the nation, bringing the ghostly to the masses and wrapping it all in a historical context to allow us to see and feel our interconnectedness to all things in all places, but mostly to one another. The ghost hunter, the historian, the author, and the beautiful mind, Keriann Brosky. Welcome to Rogue Ways, and how are you doing tonight? And did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yes, you did, Keriann Brosky. I actually go into my whole huge name as Keriann Flanagan Brosky, but you got it right. I know a lot of people don't, but it's so nice to be here, Lindsay.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Really is. Thank you.
Yeah, we've been talking about some of the difficulties we've had in just coming together tonight. So I'm glad we get to be here and hear all about all the cool things you do. I do want to mention to all the listeners and all the viewers out there that there's a new tarot course up on Thinkific. So if you go to rogueways.com/Thinkific, the link should be below you wherever you're watching or listening. Brand new tarot course, if that's what you've been waiting for, it is ready for you today. And Keriann, I always start with a pointless question of the episode. So I was going to ask you if you like to swim, and if so, what is your favorite place to swim?
Oh, actually, I have to say I love the water. I'm definitely a water person. I am Gemini, and I love the ocean and the summer on Long Island where I live. It's great. I spend a lot of time at the beach. I'm actually a pretty bad swimmer, although I'm the first one to jump off a boat or go into the ocean. Yeah, I can get by. I'm not the greatest swimmer, but I do spend a lot of time in the water, on it, sailing, and also going into the ocean and the Long Island Sound. I love it.
Wow, the ocean is actually like the scariest place for me to consider swimming. I'm like, I love lakes and rivers and all of this, but I finally have gotten into the ocean in my later life and even swum with some whales. But so I'm getting over it. But that idea that
it takes a while.
Yeah.
Yep. You have to learn. My sons are excellent swimmers. They're trained lifeguards. But the one thing we have to be aware of now on Long Island is we've had a couple of shark attacks, and we've had a lot of shark sightings last year. So that adds a whole other element to swimming in the ocean.
Yeah. Then you have to just send out the good, happy vibes and tell the sharks to go somewhere else.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, let's get into your paranormal stuff. Were you always into the paranormal, even as a child, or is that something
I was actually. The first ghost story that I ever heard was told to me by my parents about an apartment. It was an attic apartment that they lived in, that was owned by, my aunt and uncle were not married yet. They were dating. It was my aunt's parents' house, a very Italian family, and they had rented the attic apartment to my parents when they had first gotten married. And it turns out that my aunt's great-grandfather was still in the house, even though he had passed. And so in one of my ghost-related books, I wrote about the story of the Italian grandfather. And this way people would know how I got interested in it, because it was always a story that I heard of how he was seen by neighbors, by my mother, and a lot of people. So I was always interested in it, but I never thought I would be doing it as a career. My degree is actually in photography. So it's very different how I got into the whole thing.
I feel like that's kind of how life paths go, though. You're interested in this, you go that way, and then you end up like where you're actually supposed to be.
Exactly. It's all about the journey.
Yeah. Did you ever find out why he seemed to be still there, or why he was so strong a presence?
Not really. At the time it was just, accepted that, it was the old belief that if you saw your grandfather or someone that you didn't make it over to the other side or to heaven, which is what my belief is. And those views have really changed today. So there was always that belief, quick, get the priest and get them to cross over. But I do extensive lecturing on the topic of ghosts and spirits and the differences and things like that. So, I go into that. But that was, growing up, I didn't really know much about it. And basically, I started reading about things on my own about it. And as I mentioned, my degree is actually in photography. I studied photojournalism and was my area of expertise. I had to study all aspects of photography. When I was interning, I worked for Newsday, which is our big newspaper on Long Island, as a photographer. And after that, when I graduated, I was working for some local papers. I live in a very historic neighborhood, very, very rich in history, Huntington. And I started working for the papers here, the local ones, that was founded by Walt Whitman, actually. And I said, you know what, I want to do some writing. And I asked if I could write a column for the paper and focus on some of the historical properties that were still in existence, with the hopes of educating the public on our history in the hopes of preserving it. So that I did for a while. I was photographing the places and writing about it. And it actually led me to write 2 books on Huntington's history. That was in 1995 and 1997. And I became very involved with the Huntington Historical Society, where I was first vice president for 6 years. And, I was doing a lot of lecturing. And when you're writing about older homes and things, there always seems to be a ghost story or 2 that comes into it. So each of those books, I guess, had about 20 stories each. And I would say maybe 3 or 4 in each book had some ghost related story. So I thought it was right up my alley, because I said, well, I'm interested in this. I was studying on my own, and I put those in. As I mentioned, I was doing extensive lecturing. And at one point, the Historical Society said to me, we were approaching Halloween, and they said, would you maybe be interested in doing a special Halloween lecture? We know that in both books, you have a few stories that have ghosts in them. Could you maybe put a lecture together with that? I said, oh yeah, that would be a lot of fun. So we have an old barn at our Conklin house. It's a historical property, and this barn was brought in and rebuilt on the property, and it seats about 50 people. So my husband and I had taken it an additional step, I should say, and rigged the whole barn so things would happen during the lecture, and we webbed it and everything. And we had a fishing line. My husband was pulling things. And I was shocked, because the barn holds 50 people, and about 100 people showed up to see this. And I said, I can't believe all these people are interested in ghosts. So I did that lecture, and it was such a success that I was doing it continuously around every Halloween. People would come up to me and say, why don't you write a book just about ghosts? And I said, well, I was new in my career at the time. Again, this was in the 90s. And I wanted to be taken serious as both a historian and as an author. I didn't want to be considered a ghostbuster kind of thing. So I put on the back burner. And at that point, I was also dealing with my father's long-term battle with multiple sclerosis, which led into another book project that I could tell you about. But after my father's passing, I was really grief stricken. And my husband said to me, why don't you maybe think about doing another book project? Why don't you write a book about ghosts and combine it with local history? So by this point, we had a lot of shows on TV. We had medium and paranormal investigators and different things. And I said, maybe I will. And I could do it from a historical, standpoint. I said, but still, I needed to learn more about the field of paranormal. I said, so where am I going to find someone that can help me with that? And as luck would have it, in one of my lectures at the Conklin barn, in walked Joe DeQuinto. He was from Hampton Bays, and he happened to be a paranormal investigator by night. By day, he was a computer guy. And he was also developing into his mediumship. And I see now how my journey has been very guided by people and different things on the other side. And it was as if someone was telling me, this is the guy to help you. without even knowing who he really was, I asked him right on the spot, would you work with me on these ghost related projects? And of course, afterwards, I said to my husband, I'm like, oh my God, he could be an axe murderer for all I know it. And it's always a joke when we lecture together. I'm like, yeah, my first impression was Joe. I said, obviously he wasn't, thankfully. But we started working together, and I wrote the first Ghosts of Long Island book, Stories of the Paranormal. And there were 30 stories in there, places that were presumably haunted. And it was a huge success. It led to a sequel. And out of the 9 books I've written, 4 of them are ghosts related. And I also wrote a historical crime book. But it was very well received. So now I'm considered a ghost investigator as well as an author and a historian. So again, it was not anything that I had planned to be, but it worked. People liked that I was so-called normal, I was more believable and credible, I guess. And what better way to teach local history than through a ghost story? And I've even had parents coming up to me saying, my kids are reading, and I did not intend this for, children. Obviously, it was a more, adult concept. But people said that their teenagers who don't read were so fascinated by it that not only were they reading, but again, they were recognizing the places around, Long Island, and they were learning the history. So it really, it worked.
That is so cool. I know as a teacher how hard it is sometimes to get kids to read and to care about things.
Right.
So that's really, really smart. I love that is a unintended
that was an
side
extra
effect.
bonus. Yeah, it was an extra bonus because I never thought that would work out, and it did. So.
And that you, like you said, you were guided by people and sort of energies on the other side to sort of head this way and find these people and do these things. And that is really, again, we were talking about life paths, and I just think the more people can trust that and know that that's sort of true, and then you actually end up following those impulses and trusting those signs and messages, then I think the better off we all are.
Oh, it's definitely true, Lindsay. And I have really seen how not only my career, but how my life has evolved because of what I have learned, the places I've been. I mean, Joe and I at this point have investigated well over 100 places on Long Island. And, the original stories, I had included some myths and legends on Long Island because people were aware of that, such as the Amityville Horror. But I really was so against putting it in that first book. But I said, if someone from California came and saw this was before there were any ghost books, they said, they would ask, like, where is that? But that's a complicated story. And there's other ones like Mary's Grave and things like that, which were more myth related. But I had included those originally because that was part of our culture here on Long Island. But as I've been doing this work all of these years, it has really become a very spiritual journey as well. The books have become more spiritual. What I teach and lecture on has become more spiritual. And people have come up to me and will say not only did they learn the history of these places, but they really truly believe that life exists beyond this one, that communication is possible. I have included some personal stories of people that I've interviewed who have had, personal experiences. And they're very, very powerful stories, some of them heart-wrenching, but amazing at the same time. So to see it evolve into that, and my own ability to be able to communicate more than I did when I started, has really been remarkable. So I would say yes, 100%. It's the journey, and it's about the advancement, and just becoming more spiritual. And I'm just as much religious as I am spiritual.
Yeah. Oh, how beautiful. I think it's so important for people. I feel like in our culture, we've gotten so far from any kind of spirituality or any kind of real understanding of what we are outside of just a biological meat suit, on a rock hurtling through space. And, to be reconnected with that through any means, I think is so important. It's beautiful that you do that for people and that you found that for yourself as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So tell us about what you and Joe DeQuinto? How am I not saying it right? Okay, DeQuinto actually do.
Yeah,
I know you
Joe
already said
DeQuinto.
it, but
Right. Joe DeQuinto.
DeQuinto.
It's really interesting, and it's very different than what you see on TV. I like to start off with that. We're not running out of vans in the middle of the night screaming for the spirits to perform. I don't see blood dripping down walls. I don't see pots and pans flying around rooms. What I pride myself on when I lecture and what I write about is that this is very real, but as I mentioned, it is very spiritual, and it's not television. It's not Hollywood. It's not what you see in the movies. It's very, very different, the work that I do. And when Joe and I first started going on assignments together, we, most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, or 95% of our investigations were done in the middle of the day, and we're dressed like in business attire. And people would say to us, wow, you don't look like Ghostbusters. Or another one, when I was lecturing, said, you don't look like Elvira. We expected Elvira. You look like a soccer mom. And I said, well, it's very different. It's not what you see on TV. It's very subtle things that we get, but very strong, very pronounced things at the same time. So how we do an investigation, I would either be aware of a place that, maybe existed on Long Island for a while that was known to be haunted. I would start with those. Or I would get leads when I would lecture. I would keep like a guest book. If people knew of a place that was haunted, I said, write it down. I hate to use the word haunted too, but for book selling purposes, it always works. People like the word.
True.
But I use it loosely, haunted and ghosts.
Because it's not necessarily a negative thing.
No, it's not. And we can go into the difference between ghosts and spirits after we talk about this. But basically, so what we do is I find out the information. And if I feel like it's valid and it's something that I feel that I want to write about, then I'll set up an appointment to go to it. So, and again, we do everything very positive. It's all on the up and up. We stay away from anything that's negative and demonic in nature. I had said that I'm very religious also. I was born and raised a Catholic, still a practicing Catholic. And so I won't get involved with that. So if someone says, oh, well, there's a house that, 10 people were brutally murdered and cut up and they were devil worshipers, would you come? I'm like, no, we don't do that. So we just stay away from that kind of thing. So let's say it's a historical property. We'll go, and because I'm a professional photographer as well, I will go around and use my camera equipment. So I use two types of cameras. One is a Nikon D80, which is a professional camera with the battery pack, the big flash, all of that. That is so I could get just nice looking photographs for the book of the place that we are working on. But I also shoot with a little Nikon Coolpix, which I call my orb camera. And it's interesting because just like a person, because these ghosts and spirits are people, okay? And that's what everyone has to remember. They think that they're this scary thing, but they're really not. Basically, how they were on the earth is how they are on the other side. So with the cameras, it's easier for them to manipulate the smaller camera than it is a larger camera. The same thing is that if I handed you each camera, you would probably be more comfortable using the smaller camera. Yeah. So I use those. I also use an electromagnetic field indicator, or a ghost meter, which is just like a little tiny box that goes around and picks up energy. You have to be able to rule things out. So if you hold it in front of a microphone or an electrical socket, it'll start going off. But if you hold it in the middle of an auditorium and you're not near anything electrical and it starts beeping at a higher frequency, then chances are there's some kind of energy there, which could possibly be a spirit of some kind. I use recorders like from Radio Shack, little recorder, digital, that I use to conduct the interview, because I will prepare questions ahead of time and interview the person about the history and about their ghost, situations, the paranormal experiences. Most of the time, I don't really give Joe too much information. So when we get there, he'll find out right then and there, or we'll do the investigation part first and then do the interview with the person that owns it. It could be a home, it could be a restaurant, a museum. mansion. We've done all of those. So then with Joe, we'll go around, I'll be photographing, he'll photograph as well because he can and does get orbs. We sometimes have both gotten orbs at the same time. It's very interesting because you'll see the same orb in my image, and then you'll see it in Joe's, but it'll be different in the frame. It'll have moved because we're slightly off and, by seconds in photographing the image. But what we really have been known for in the past couple of years are our EVPs. And those are electronic voice phenomenon, and they're voices of spirits from the other side that will leave information on a recorder. So just to tell you a little bit about that for listeners who may not understand what this is. First time I started working with Joe, he had asked me how I was going to conduct the interviews. And I said I would use a digital recorder. And he was the first one. I had never heard of them until Joe. And he said, well, you might get the voice of a spirit leaving your message. Well, I'm pretty open, but even I thought, I was like, this is crazy. I'm like, I think he's making this up, or I don't understand what this is. So I wasn't really sure of it. And on our very first assignment, it wasn't even a place that was haunted. We were going to speak to a couple who had lived in a house, who had like a poltergeist type activity due to objects that were brought in from another country. Oh, wow. So they had gotten rid of those objects. They had nothing in their house. They were living in a house a couple of miles away. And they were older couples, so there were no children in the house. There were no dogs. There's no television on, no radio, nothing. We had a nor'easter, and Joe was coming all the way out from the Hamptons, so he was delayed. And I said, well, don't worry about it. It's our first assignment, and we're not really on investigation. We're just conducting the interview. And so I said, whenever you get here is fine. So it was a fairly large living room that I was sitting in, and there was a love seat. And then in the center, they were across from one another, but in between was a large coffee table, big square. So I had put the recorder in the center of the table. Now, if I was playing back a recording for you, Lindsay, you would know approximately how far I was away or the guest was away from the recording, okay? Because you'd be able to hear that distance. The same thing as when people know if you're on speakerphone as opposed to holding the phone up. Yeah. So Joe got there after I was done with the interview, and everything was fine. There was nothing unusual. And 2 weeks later, I was transcribing. And that's probably the most tedious thing about writing the books, is because I have to hand transcribe. It's just easier. And then I'll do that on paper, and then I'll start doing, I have tons of research to do on each of these places, and then start doing it on the computer. So I was in the transcribing stage halfway through the interview, and everything was going fine. And all of a sudden, it was as if a little girl picked up that recorder and put it to her mouth and said, hold me, in a loud whisper. Oh. I almost fell off the floor. So I played it for my husband, and he said, oh my God, what is that? I said, I think these are one of those EVPs that Joe was telling me about. And so I was able to email the file to Joe, and he said, congratulations, you've gotten your first EVP, and it happens to be a class A, which is the most audible. There's A, B, and C. And C is kind of like robotic. It's kind of hard to hear. But A is like amazing. It was as if that had to happen, because I would have always doubted Joe. I would have always have thought that he was doing something. And I want to, when I finish this story, I want to tell you, what I tell my audiences when I lecture. But to go back, so to your original question of how we conduct the interviews. So we're looking for EVPs. Now, this is Joe's specialty. He has really concentrated, worked with some big people on learning the process of how to get the EVPs. But we've now advanced to the next level. Now, for the first two ghost projects, the ghost books, we were only on white noise EVPs. And that's you getting them off of white noise, which would be like heaters, air conditionings, that type of thing, any kind of sound. And I prided myself because I was starting to get them, and I was rivaling Joe on some of them, and said, look what I got. You didn't even get an EVP today. But Joe started doing more research and looking into other things, and it evolved into using a ghost box, which is basically a transistor radio one of those old fashioned ones where you turn it with your thumb. And one of the wires is strategically cut so that the radio continuously scans. So you'll hear bits and pieces of songs, news, commercials, that type of thing. So what we do now is we have live time communication with those on the other side where we have asked questions. Now we've done this with people that own the historical properties and they are blown away at what we get. Then Joe brings it back, and because you could hear the answers, and Joe cleans it up just slightly, does not alter anything. And then we put together a transcript and we play these EVPs, these ghost box recordings for our audiences. If anyone is interested in listening to the ones that we got for my latest book, which is Haunted Long Island Mysteries, they could go onto my website at ghostsoflongisland.com. And if you go into the new book, I think there's 2 sets of EVPs, one for Haunted Long Island Mysteries and one for Historic Haunts of Long Island. You can actually listen to it and read along. It's also in the books. I have the transcripts in the books, and it's interactive. You can read the book and go on. So it's really very, very fascinating. And we've had a lot of fun with them. Again, they're positive conversations. We've connected with those people from the past, as an old time school teacher, people from the Revolutionary War. And it's just really spectacular what we've been able to get, and audiences absolutely love them. So to get to the point of what I wanted to say as far as teaching people during the lectures, we could have viewers right now thinking this guest is really nuts. Where'd you find her, Lindsay?
They love it.
They love it. So this is what I tell people when I lecture. I say, I know this is like really hard to imagine, and especially if you're not accustomed to this type of thing, you'd think I was crazy. But I said, let's do a little test here. Let's go back in time. So today, let's say July 5th, 2020, I'm going to take you back to July 5th, 1800. All right. So boom, everyone's back in the 1800s, and I'm in a live audience, let's say. So I'm speaking to everyone and I say, I have something to show you. I roll in a flat screen television. Now, in a live audience, people are looking at this. They've never seen anything that remotely looks like this. The texture, the smoothness, this thing. What is this even made out of, right? Well, pretend we have electricity. I plug it in and I turn it on and I say, look, this man is talking to you live right now from London, England. What would you say in 1800? I mean, look what we're doing now. Yeah. I mean, you told me just before that this podcast goes all over the world.
Yeah.
So would you be able to convince anyone in the 1800s of that?
No.
They wouldn't even understand a podcast.
Right.
So our minds could not possibly understand a television set in the 1800s. No matter how much I tried to convince you, you would say it's a trick. I was making it happen because we couldn't comprehend it. So now let's leave the 1800s, and now it's July 5th, 1950. You're going on a family vacation. You have the husband driving, the wife's in the passenger. You're in one of those great 1950 cars, and kids are in the back. And the husband says to the wife, well, you know that there's, you have everything set with the maps, right? Because we have to know where we're going. Yeah, I have the maps all set, all this awkwardness with maps. And as they start their journey, they get on the highway and she rolls down the window and she throws the map out the window. And the husband says, what are you doing? How are we going to know where to go now? We need that map. And she says, we don't need that map. I'm going to press a button right up here by the mirror. And there's going to be another woman who's going to give you directions and tell you where to go. What would you think in 1950? It's impossible. Yeah. I mean, no one would ever believe that. We couldn't comprehend that. And that's not all that long ago. And today it's the modern GPS. So when I do these podcasts, when I do my webinars and I speak to live audiences, I try to tell people it's okay to not quite understand all of these things. It's taken me years to understand and study this and see it for myself, to know that there is more than what we know on this earth, that communication is possible and that there are various means and ways of getting this communication, and that life does exist after this. So what I tell people is, you could think I'm crazy still, that's fine. I'm not trying to prove or disprove anything, but just be open to the fact that there are things that we don't know. And I truly believe that the veil is getting closer, that we can do this. So what Joe and I do is basically, then we do, I do all the research for these things, because everything has to be very accurate for going into the book, because I am teaching history this way. Then we do the ghost investigation, where we walk around with the cameras and the recorders. We do the ghost box recording sessions and EVP sessions. And then what's great about Joe is, because he is a medium, we use his mediumship to confirm things. Or if he says, I think so and so is coming in, let's get the ghost box out and see if it is this person. So we use very minimal equipment. That's basically it. And the electromagnetic field indicator. And if they want to come out and speak to us, then we do. We never demand anything of the spiritual world, because again, they are people. And when Joe speaks to our audiences, he will tell people to get the creepiness out of it. Think of it as someone's grandfather, aunt, uncle, mother. You know, they're people. So you have to treat them with respect. And then because of that, we end up getting a lot more than a lot of times what you see on TV, I believe, because we treat them with respect.
That was going to be my next question, was you probably get such a better interaction and more of it because of that, because it's so rare that people, I really don't like that attitude that they go out and just start harassing.
I can't stand it.
Yeah. So that's nice.
I don't watch any of the shows.
I know.
It's like, you know, no need.
No, that's beautiful. And you were saying too earlier, you know, we don't do anything like assume that we need to force them to pass over. And I feel like that's more respectful too, but I'm not sure exactly what is going on when we have ghosts. And also, while we're talking about that, what is the difference between ghosts versus spirits?
Yes, that's a big thing. Ghosts tend to be more place centered, which means for reasons unknown, they decide to stay on the earth plane and they don't cross over to the other side. We do have people that say, oh, will you perform, you know, exorcisms, or will you help people cross the other side? No, that is not anything that either of us do. Spirits, on the other hand, are similar to ghosts, but they are not place centered. So meaning they can come and go from whatever dimension they're in. Again, I'm Roman Catholic. For me, my belief is in heaven, whatever anyone's belief is. We could refer to it as the other side. So if someone's on the other side, they can come and sort of go through that veil and be with us. So, and it's fascinating to grasp this concept, because our loved ones do not leave us. They are aware of what we're doing. They're aware of what's happening in our life. They try to give us messages. We're not always open to them, because our minds are on our computers and our cars, on the radio and the phones, and it's complicated. We don't just sit and be. And when I'm doing this work, I'm forced to have to do that. And so I will be more sensitive to things during times that I'm working than when I'm running around like everybody else, like a chicken without a head on. So, but our loved ones do come in. It doesn't mean that they are not where they're supposed to be. And that's the biggest difference. We talked about the Italian grandfather, and that was like, oh my gosh, did he not make it to heaven? Well, if your grandfather was a good person on the earth, of course he made it to heaven or wherever he's supposed to be. But he was popping in to say hello and check on people. And so that's okay. You know, you don't have to run out and get the priest for that kind of thing. And people could actually move their own relatives along if they want to. For instance, I had a woman call me a couple of years ago whose mother had passed. She was devastated, but the knowledge of her mother being around her was too much for her to handle. And she said, I feel her in the kitchen. I sense her, like I know, and I can't deal with it. What should I do? And I said, well, it's your mother. I said, just talk to her. Say, I really appreciate, I know you're here, that you're making your presence known, but I'm just not ready for this type of communication right now. And they're looking at me like, really? I said, yeah. I said, you might feel ridiculous because you'll feel like you're not speaking to anyone, but you are. And 9 out of 10 times I've told people these things, and it has worked. Then of course you get people who do believe, who don't have any experiences, like, why don't I have an experience and everything? And it depends too on, in that case, it depends on the person who has crossed, if this is something they believed in their lifetime, or if they're strong communicators or not, and the energy level of both the communicator and the person who's supposed to be getting the messages. The energy could be off. So there's many reasons for that. But when I'm giving lectures, I say to people, all right, maybe there's 50 people in the audience, but there's probably really 100 people, because all of you come with your own. And that should be something that's very consoling. I remember taking a photograph of my sons when they were little at the Museum of Natural History in New York City. And we were up, I think it was on the second floor, and we were looking down. There's this big whale, I think it was, that hangs from this massive ceiling. And we were up on the balcony. So I wanted to get a picture of them in this area with the whale. And when I took a photograph of them, there were hundreds of orbs all over the place. And it's because there were hundreds of people in the museum, and someone else brought their grandfather who passed or whatever it was. But so it should be comforting. The same thing with orbs, that each one, like a person, is different. I spent a lot of years studying them, and I had gotten the same orb, whether I was in North Carolina, Florida, Long Island. And when I blew it up, it was identical, because some of them could be speckled. They could have rings. They're different colors. Some of them have faces in them. I got one with a face of a dog in it once at a party. And I took a picture of a relative, and there was an orb in the back with a dog's face. I said, well, someone's dog was coming. So they're all different. So that's the big difference. And with ghosts, you know, they just sometimes don't want to cross. One of our best examples, we have a restaurant called the Country House Restaurant in Stony Brook, and it dates back to the Revolutionary War. And there was a girl that was brutally murdered there. She was left in charge of her siblings, and her parents had to go secure property in New Jersey. And Long Island was definitely under attack by the British, and the British came in and took over the house. And how could a 17-year-old girl possibly defend against the British soldiers? And she was always seen in this one room looking out, wishing for her parents to come back. And her parents, she didn't know, were murdered in New Jersey. But when the British left the house eventually, it was the townspeople that actually murdered her, because they thought she was pro-British. And but you know, how could a girl defend against the British soldiers? So she has never left, and it's a fabulous restaurant, and I have had countless experiences there. People have written to me about their experiences. The owner, Annette, is happy there. She just does not want to move on to the other side. So that is an example of a ghost. But there's also, so you understand now the difference between ghosts and spirits. But there are also different types of ghosts. I spent a lot of time studying the work of Peter Underwood, and I'm still in touch with his grandson, who's keeping his legend alive. Peter died a couple of years ago, but he was world renowned from London, England. He was a very well-known paranormal investigator and author, and he wrote multiple books. And very early on, I was reading them, and he wrote about the 10 different types of ghosts. And it's something that I believe, and I included in my original Ghosts of Long Island book. And one of them would be like a traditional type of ghost, which an example is Annette Williamson, who haunts the country house. But then there are modern type ghosts that appear for just short times. There's animal ghosts, ghosts of inanimate objects, cyclical ghosts that appear the same day at the same time. You know, there are certain things that are more energy based that are not necessarily like your version of what a ghost should be. There are poltergeists as well, but those are probably the least common, where Hollywood makes them to be the most common. So he put this list together, and over the years, Joe and I have seen how our own work fits into these different types of ghosts. So when someone says to me, well, what is a ghost? And I said, well, you have an hour, you know. It's hard to pinpoint it as any one particular thing, because there are different types, and there is a difference between the ghosts and the spirits.
So the spirits are mostly they're more conscious in the moment and able to move around and sort of interact and Just like
Yes.
they were alive, but in this energy body sort of.
Exactly. Exactly. Very good.
And when you're talking about, you have your religion and you have your spirituality, do they conflict at all, or do you find that these are perfectly acceptable? And because I feel like a lot of people who have their religion still will look at this and think, well, that's all demonic then. All of that's
Yeah.
demonic. Everything you're talking about, everything you're interacting with is demons, and you're just being fooled. What is your idea about that?
Exactly. Very excellent question, and it's one that there have been struggles for me over the years. My husband and I both came from religious families. Church on Sunday. I went to Catholic school. My own children went to Catholic school. I'm very, very firm in my faith and my love of the Blessed Mother and of Christ and of Padre Pio, which is, we could go into that a little bit about one of my other books. He's the saint who bore the stigmata, who the church won't say this, but he was a medium also. A lot of things with him. But yes, I have had issues with other people's conception of what I should believe. And it was a tough thing for me in the early years. But I realized, I said, you know what? I know who I am, and I know the talents that God has given me, and what my work has done to help people who have been in grief. So I have made it work. When I was in high school, I have to say, not to toot my own horn, but I was a good kid. I didn't get myself into trouble and things like that. And so our family priest at our parish, he was someone that actually grew up with my father. He was a lot older than my father, but he became a Monsignor. So he was very high up. And I remember when I was in high school going to confession, and it was face to face with him. And he said, okay, what's going on? And I said, I'm a bad Catholic. And he's trying not to laugh. He's like, Keriann, what are you talking about? Why are you a bad Catholic? I said, well, I'm believing in things that the church doesn't teach. He's like what? And I said, well, I just finished reading Out on a Limb by Shirley MacLaine. And he looked at me and he smiled. And I said, I believe in certain things that the church doesn't agree with. And he said, let me tell you something. He said, the Catholic Church is like a box, and it's up to us to teach you what's in that box, which is the Catholic religion and about Christ and all of that. He said, but it's up to you to go outside of the box, take what you know, but then find your own spiritual path. And it really helped me. And I've even had fundamentalist Catholics say to me, oh, well, maybe you heard him wrong. And I said, no, I didn't hear him wrong, because it set the whole path of my life. And so I love my religion, but, I think it's okay to go beyond that box sometimes, because I've learned things that go hand in hand because of communication that I've had, and because of what I've learned. It has actually brought me closer to Christ and made me more religious, more firm in my religion. But yes, a lot of fundamentalist Catholics would argue and say that communication with the dead is bad and demonic. I mean, if we were living in Salem, Massachusetts times, I would be probably one of the people hanging from the tree with most of my friends.
Yeah.
And it's a shame, because I know what I do is good, and I know what I believe in, and everything has been very, very good. And if you go back to the history of Catholicism with the saints, they were mediums. They had the ability to do a lot of things. They were able to communicate with the other side, and they became saints, so I have been able to make it work. And if people want to judge me for it, then I have to look at it that it's their problem. I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing, and it's what God gave me to do. So
I love that. I feel very similarly, and I think when you brought up Padre Pio, I had this memory go off where I'm like, wait, didn't he also have experiences like bilocation? I don't know if you've heard about it, right? So there's all kinds of saints actually that seem to have experiences that otherwise would now be labeled like demonic. And I'm like, but they're a saint. Like they're clearly of God. And so I think,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And with Padre Pio, the Catholic Church had put him away for years, studying him because they didn't even believe him. And how this happened with the books I've done. So just to backtrack a little bit, I've written 9 books altogether. I told you about the first 2 books were just on Huntington's history of my town. That expanded to the Ghosts of Long Island books. I wrote Ghosts of Long Island, Stories of the Paranormal, and then a sequel. And then in between that, I'm also very into cooking. And I co-authored an Italian cookbook with a place called Mr. Sausage in Huntington. And no, it's not a haunted cookbook. But my other love, I was a food writer for 5 years as well, doing freelance work while I was working on these books for Edible Long Island. And I had my own column, Keriann Eats. So I co-authored this cookbook in between the ghost books. And then I wrote, what came next, was The Metal, which is my only novel. And that's the one with Padre Pio. So I'll tell you about that in a second. I wrote Historic Crimes of Long Island, which was actually scarier to write than any of the ghost books.
Yeah.
Historic Haunts of Long Island and Haunted Long Island Mysteries is my latest one. But what happened with The Metal, I mentioned about my father having multiple sclerosis. I was fortunate enough to come from a really great family. I mean, to me, it was as perfect as a family could be. And my father was diagnosed with MS at age 48, and it was devastating. He was not able to work. Financially, it was difficult, devastating for my mother and for me and my siblings. And there was a point in my life that I became very angry with God and said, how could God do this? Like, why would he allow this? My parents helped so many people. They did so much good. And I was really upset. You know, I mean, he was diagnosed about a year before I got married. And I wanted to have him around to be able to do things. And he was limited. Even my husband and I took my parents everywhere with us, even with walkers, wheelchairs, and everything. But I would see terrible things. You know, as a young girl, you look at your father as someone that's invincible, and I'd see him fall and get hurt and be humiliated, and it was horrible. And so I started getting angrier and angrier at God. And I got to the point that I just had even so much physical energy that I just wanted to smash something. And I look back like I can't believe I'm the same person, but that's how devastating it was. And this went on for 16 years. Now, 14 years rather. So one day, I forget what it was. I guess my father was back in a rehab and things were not good. And I had reached my limit. And I said to my husband, I said, I'm never going to church again. It's done. It's over. I don't believe in miracles. I don't believe in anything. And meanwhile, my husband's mother had worked for the diocese. And I mean, like I said, we came from religious families. So he begged me. He said, please just go today. Maybe it'll be different at church today. And I was so hurting. And I went, and of course, the whole homily was, and the readings, the gospel was about Jesus curing the leper. So I became even angrier, saying, see, like, it's right in my face. He cured people and he won't do that now. So I came home. I said, that's it. I said, I'm never going to church again. It's over. I'm just done. And the very next day, I was in Mr. Sausage. This is before the cookbook too, where I met an Italian stranger. I was introduced to him, just his first name. And we were, because I knew them in Mr. Sausage, you know, I knew them from growing up. Also, my parents had known the family. So they were telling this man about my Huntington books. And that was it. He knew nothing about me. And then all of a sudden he says, after they go back into the kitchen for a minute, he says, let me ask you something. He says, do you believe in miracles? This is the God's honest truth. And it was the day after I had denounced miracles. And I said, I was really taken aback. And I said, well, I believe that they used to exist, but I don't think they exist anymore. He says, you have someone in your life that's sick, don't you? And I was like, yeah, my father. He said, have you heard of Padre Pio? I said, who? He said, Padre Pio, the saint who bore the stigmata. I said, no, why is that? I said, I've gone to Catholic school my whole life and church. Why don't I know this? He said, well, because the church put him away. This is before he was a saint. And so he starts telling me about Padre Pio. He says, I'll be right back. He goes out of the store, comes back in and hands me a prayer card. He says, pray to him and you will, you'll see what happens. So I start praying to him. And this man, who would be the most unlikely person you would ever think to be like an angel, was my angel. He was the only person that could get through to me. And he helped me for years, teaching me about Padre Pio. He had bilocation, like you said. He had the ability to read people's minds and know what was in their heads. He had all sorts of gifts. He was a true mystic. And he actually had told Pope John Paul II, when he was a seminarian, that he was going to be the Pope one day. And when he started to bleed from his hands, and the church, had to make sure these weren't self-inflicted. And it was years worth of studying him. And it was devastating for him because he was not allowed to go to the confessional and hear people's confessions or do mass. And eventually it was Pope John Paul II who, made him allowed him to become a saint. There were several miracles there were tons of miracles actually that were taking place. And one of them even took place on Long Island with a man who was sick with cancer, who actually drove Padre Pio in his car, not knowing that it was Padre Pio, who had died back in 1968. So anyway, my angel had given me a Padre Pio medal that was very old, that had for a second class relic, a piece of his actual clothing. Most of the ones that are out there now are third class relics that are attached to them. And he said, give this to your father. And I did. And from that point on, I started having all these amazing things. People could say they were coincidences. Going to a religious shop to get a communion gift for a friend's daughter. And there's all of a sudden a flyer in my bag about, a prayer, a healing mass, whereas the man that drove Padre Pio was going to be speaking at. I would go into a pizzeria and there would be a picture of Padre Pio. So this man helped me get my faith back in God. And every time my father was in the hospital, I would look at this medal and it would help me. And eventually when my father did die, there were times he got better and no one could understand why, but I always prayed for my father to be cured. And I had learned over time that sometimes the miracles we ask for aren't always the ones that we receive, and that there are other reasons. And it took me, believe me, it took me the past 17 years to understand it. So he did end up passing, but on the night he died, he was wearing the medal. And something happened. There was a miracle that took place that night with the medal, and I did not know it until the next day. It was a silver medal, and usually I have it on. I don't have it on right now because I was changing quick before coming to my office here, but the medal was silver with this relic. And I was with my father hours before he passed. He was not able to communicate at the time. I remember praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet, which you pray when people are dying. And the next day, we went back to the house to make the funeral arrangements. And I asked the aide that was living there at the time if I could have the medal. I told my mother that night after I had left the house, because I had little kids at the time, so I had to go home. And he passed, when I was at home, if I could have the Padre Pio medal. And when the aide put it in my hand, the next day I was looking at it in absolute disbelief, because the medal had turned to gold. and it was hanging on the silver chain.
Oh, I got chills.
And I could not understand this. I've heard of rosary beads turning to gold, and I did not know what to do. I wore it as is, the gold on the silver chain, to my father's wake. It brought me a lot of strength, and the angel had disappeared for 2 years, and he surfaced again. And then I said, "Did you hear what happened to the medal?" And he said, "I did. And I've never had one do that before." He's given out hundreds of them.
Wow.
And he said, "Mark my words, you'll be writing a story about this one day." And I eventually did. And it's called The Medal. And it's a work of fiction, though, because it was too personal at the time to write it. It's a work of nonfiction. So the main character of Bethany Fitzpatrick was a combination of myself and my mother, and what we witnessed or felt during that time of my father's battle with MS. And I made her a pastry chef because I wanted to have something with cooking. And it takes place in Northport, which is a beautiful seafaring town, not far from where I live. And I created an angel and the whole thing, and did a very similar story. And I was not prepared for the impact that that book had on people, saying that it changed their lives and brought them back to faith. And what's interesting is, we were talking before, I would not have been able to properly write that book unless I had the experiences and knew what I knew beforehand with the paranormal.
Wow.
So it's all tied together, the whole thing. And when I go out on book tour, the Ghosts of Long Island books are now out of print because those were early on. You could just get them in e-format. But I bring a couple of my other titles. So I have Haunted Long Island Mysteries, Historic Haunts of Long Island, Historic Crimes, and The Medal I bring to ghost lectures that I do every fall when I'm on tour. And I can't tell you the amount of copies of The Medal that I sell at ghost lectures. And so I feel like I'm definitely doing the work of God, and that there was a reason and a purpose why my father had to die. And if it can help people reconnect and understand things better, as far as miracles and praying to saints and that kind of thing, then that's, the whole purpose of writing it.
Oh, wow.
So that's why it's been a journey, and
Yeah.
I didn't ask for any of this. It
No.
just sort of evolved into all of this. So
I feel like you're the best person to carry that energy forth and do that work then, because you didn't ask for it, weren't looking for it, and were just genuinely, curious and present and reacting in the honest ways you would. Like you said, you were so angry and you wanted to smash things and gave up your faith, and that's human response to grief and suffering. So
exactly. And that's why people can relate and they don't feel alone, because being a caretaker is very difficult. My mother passed away at the end of 2020, and she was in the hospital for 7 months, and she was not an old person. And so I had to go through a whole other thing again, but it was very different though, going at it the second time, having the experiences that I've had and knowing that I've had. And as difficult as it is, I knew that there was higher purposes, and I'm like anyone else. I miss both my parents, and there are times that I want them in the physical, even though I have had communication through friends that are mediums and things, and my own sense, and I believe in signs. But we're human, so I want to sit and have a glass of wine with them, that kind of thing. But the fact that from my experiences, if I could help others to get through grief, or to have a better understanding that they're not alone in caretaking, or not alone in feeling alone from having lost someone, then that's the whole purpose of my work. So it's interchangeable. And that's why I'm comfortable with who I am now, as far as where I'm at with both my spirituality and my religion, because it just, for me, it works. I know it works. And it's nothing to be ashamed of with what I believe.
I love that so much. It's really clear. Travis in the chat said, I love how she clearly lives in alignment with her beliefs. And I feel the same. It's very obvious.
I'm so glad
that you're very genuine, and people are loving this story as well. And it's really, to bring it back to our culture and being so, detached from death and the afterlife, and also the spiritual and whatever people's backgrounds and religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs were kind of disconnected from most of it.
Yes.
And so, like you said, the second time when your mother died, it was different. But part of you had that, it's a type of faith that's even more unshakable because you've lived it and you know that it is true, that there is something on the other side, and it's just a different feeling and relief that you can have.
Yeah, it is a relief. It is. Well, I mean, I have sad moments, don't get me wrong, but I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that my parents are, number one, together again. Number two, they know everything that's going on. Number three, they give signs. Number four, you can have still feelings. The love doesn't end. And I try to look at it, and if other people could look at it this way too. If I was living in the United States and I had a loved one who lived in Africa, how many times would I get to Africa? Okay, through COVID and everything. Okay, but I would still know that that person was in Africa, even though I wasn't talking to them or seeing them, correct?
Right.
It's the same thing. They're just in another room. And it's just a little bit longer waiting time. Maybe they're in Africa and I have to wait 3 years. Maybe now with my mother, I mean, hopefully I'm not going anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah.
But it's a longer wait. For us, it's hard because we're humans. We have concept of time, and everything is about time. On the other side, there is no time. And it's hard for us to understand that. So what could be 30 years for someone is, a long time. And in heaven, it's a split second. Now, easier said than done, okay, because obviously people lose children, people have tragedies, and those are really, really hard to get through. And even though I haven't experienced that type of thing, I've had a tremendous amount of loss. Not this past year, but in 2020 to 2021, I lost 7 people I was close to in a year and a half. And 3 of them were under the age of 58. Only one of them to COVID.
Wow, I'm so sorry.
So I'm definitely not a stranger to grief and death. But thankfully, I have not lost a child or had anything really tragic like murders and things like that. So I can't imagine how difficult it is for those people. But again, they will be reunited with those children or those people that were victims of horrible deaths. And we have to learn how to live in this life. If you want to equate it to a physical thing, if someone lost an arm in their adulthood, they can still live with that arm. They'll never be the same though, but they can learn to live without it and to adapt. And that's what we have to do. That's why they say when children lose parents and things, young children, they're just more adaptable than we are. We like to force things. We want what we want. And I've said that too. As much as I know, I miss my parents. I want them to be a part of my everyday life. But then I sit and say, you know what? I was fortunate that I had really good parents, and I would rather have had them for the years that I did than to be a horrible parents that lived to be 100. You know what I'm saying? So I was fortunate, and I have to look at it that way. And, it's between what I know with Padre Pio, my faith, and then what I've done with the ghost stuff is just remarkable. I mean, the last chapter in Haunted Long Island Mysteries is a story called Rebecca. And it really is a very powerful story. It started out originally about a story of the haunted riding stable in Manorville on Long Island. And, but unfortunately, the people that own the property, they had one child named Rebecca, and she was a very experienced equestrian. I mean, we're talking on the verge of being accepted for the Olympics. She had ridden in Europe and Israel and all these places. And she died upstate New York in 2016 of in the ring. She got into a very disastrous riding accident and bled right out in the ring in front of her mother.
God.
Now, I am a former equestrian. I have children. I was very affected by the story. Joe and I went and we spoke to the parents and another couple that were very good friends of theirs that were horse owners. And half the story was on the things that went on in the stable that were paranormal experiences. But the other half was on their communication with their daughter, Rebecca. I was so taken back by this. They gave me a binder, the mother, and this was her only child, and the mother had been adopted. So she said, and she and her daughter had looked exactly alike. And she said, and this was the only person in my life that I knew who had the same face as me. And she's gone. It was heartbreaking. And so we were there probably about 3 hours. I came home, I was wrecked. You know, it takes a lot out of you to even hear it. So I had this binder and it had all of her accomplishments, plus all of the articles of her passing. And I was sitting in my office and I was going through it. And it was just me. And I started to have tears roll down my eyes because it hit close to home. And next thing you know, I have developed clairsentience over the past couple of years.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. And it just, again, I was not counting on this.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, there she is. She's next to me. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was next to me. And she's a very strong communicator. I'm only able to with her and 2 other spirits who are strong communicators. And this is when some clairaudience starts to develop. And I heard her say, "Don't be sad, I'm fine." And I said, "But I am sad." And I cried. Now, the next time she appeared was when I was writing the story. And I felt like she was right up front. And, you know, I thought I was hearing her tell me some things. But again, when this kind of stuff starts to happen, you doubt it, you second guess it. You're like, no, I'm making it up. I'm hearing things. You know, you make up all excuses. But I decided to write down 3 pertinent things that I thought that I heard her say. I called the mother because the mother was very open to everything. And I said, I need to run this by you because either I'm completely losing my mind or your daughter was in the office with me. I said, would she have said this? Would she have said this? Dead silence on the phone. And then she says to me, "My daughter was in your office." And it's amazing. And for some reason, Rebecca, and she was 22 when she died, she always knew she was going to die young. And like she told her mother, "I'm not going to make it to old age." And her mother's like, "Why would you say that? You're a young, healthy person." She says, "I don't know. I just know." Her ringtone on her phone was "If I Die Young" by the band Perry. She played this song over and over for years. Okay. So Joe and I, now the song, obviously, like this came out, for those of you who know country music, the song has been out for a while. So on a more newer satellite country radio, it would not be playing as often, okay, as it used to be. So Joe and I had done a lecture on Long Island last fall, and it was when this book just came out. And I was telling the story at this library about Rebecca. That's how we always end the lecture. And as soon as it ended and we were done with the book signing portion, I got in the car, I turned on the radio, and the song "If I Die Young" came on by the band Perry. And I took a picture of it and we put it in our slideshow now when we show about our communication with Rebecca. So it's things like that, I mean, and this isn't a ghost book, you know, this is why I'm saying it's not a regular type of thing. You're learning history and you're learning about spiritual things. And it's just remarkable. And that story touched, first of all, it gave closure to her parents of some kind. And it touched so many people who were hurting, who loved her. There were little girls who wanted to be her, you know, and how could the superstar die? So to be able to be a part of that and to make a difference in some small way has just been amazing, because I was a photographer. I was photographing news scenes and this is what happened. But you see now how it all ties in, all of it. So it's just, who knows what's in store. I just keep moving on and seeing what's going to be next.
I like to say I just do what I'm told,
Yeah,
God,
exactly.
you tell me, I'll just keep going.
Yeah, and sometimes it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Sometimes I'm like, I said, I wish I just had a normal life, and but you just have to go with it. You really have to go with it.
Yeah, normal life would be boring at this point.
Oh yeah.
Well, I love the integrity and the love and the respect and honor that you bring to it all too, because I really think that that's lacking. So it's so refreshing to see that, and I do think that's why you're having more and more experiences and more of your own sort of channels opening up, and that's really important. I'm so glad that you can share this with people. I'm gonna buy the medal as soon as we're done here, which brings me to ask, what is the best way for people to find and buy any of your books?
Okay, if you want personalized and signed copies, you can get them directly through my website, Lindsay.
Yes.
You just have to go on to ghostsoflongisland.com or KeriannFlanaganBrosky.com, but have fun trying to spell that. So ghostsoflongisland.com, and you'll see Spot Buy books. And I have the most current ones, which would be Historical Haunts of Long Island, Haunted Long Island Mysteries, Historic Crimes, and the medal. And I get it right out. There's a spot where people can say who they want it personalized to, and I will mail it out. If you're in a foreign country and want it, I can do that as well. It's no problem. I offer free shipping, and they could get it there. They could also get it. Any of the books are also on Amazon, but obviously they won't be signed. But you can get them on Amazon as well. And then here on Long Island, we have them at local bookstores and various different museums and things that sell those types of books.
Oh, how cool. Why don't you sound like you're from Long Island to me?
Everyone says that.
Yeah,
to
you
me.
don't.
I don't know. Everyone just thinks I'm from the Midwest. I don't know. Maybe it's because of all the lives. Maybe I it's a combination of so many things. But yeah, my husband, he sounds like he's from New York.
You balance each other out.
Right. Yeah. But I was born and raised on Long Island, so I'm definitely a New Yorker.
I know we also have your Twitter and your Instagram below wherever people are watching or listening to this, but if you want to mention it for the people who don't.
Yeah, I'm on Facebook. I was taking a little bit of a break from social media for a little bit, but I am getting back onto Facebook under Keriann Flanagan Brosky. It's a professional page. I think there's some kind of friends page, but it's not active. So if it says to be a friend, don't go to that one. Go to the one where you have to physically like the page. So that's Keriann Flanagan Brosky. Instagram has the work that I do, and I'll put up about my book tours and things like that. But Instagram has a lot of my food stuff. So if you want to see
even better
what I'm eating or what I'm cooking, Instagram's a fun one. Again, it's under Keriann Flanagan Brosky. Twitter I do, but I have to be honest, I'm not that big of a technical person when it comes to things. I don't understand how to do Twitter that much, but I put some things up.
It's so confusing.
It's odd to me. Yeah, it's odd to me. I mainly do Instagram, Facebook, and if you want to know where I'm going to be appearing, there's also, if you go onto the website, people can sign up for my newsletter, and see what I'm doing, and I tell different stories with the newsletter as well. So that's something that's available if people are interested. And then I have a YouTube station under Keriann Flanagan Brosky. Especially during COVID, Joe and I did a tremendous amount of webinars on specific topics. Like we did one on Peter Underwood's 10 Types of Ghosts. We did them for various places in the books, and just different topics in general, EVPs, ghost box recordings. So if you want to see any of those webinars, most of them are up. I still am in the process of working with my web guy to get all of them up. But like everybody else, we were doing a tremendous amount of, Zooms and all of that. So if you Google it, if you can't remember the website or anything, you can find it under my name.
Oh, that's cool. So people can go get into more of the topics that you present about too.
Exactly.
How fun. I'm so excited. Well, I always like to give people a final chance to say any final words of wisdom or thoughts for people who have been listening this whole time, or just to give us some last things to go off of. What would you like to say?
Sure. I think what I would like to say is mainly just for people to be open to possibilities. This type of work, you do have to be careful. Also, I don't believe in Ouija boards or any of those types of things. You have to, be careful to protect yourself, because of my beliefs and because of Padre Pio and my love of Christ and Mary. I go into things confidently, but you have to be very careful, to stay away from, because there are negative energies, unfortunately, in the world. But like I said, if you want to get started like I did, just start reading about things, get reliable, people and books and things like that have good backgrounds of understanding this, and then just be open to things. But on a more personal level, look for signs from our lost loved ones, because they do give them. And it could be in a song that happens to come on the radio at the right time, a feather that drops out of nowhere. It could be cardinals and butterflies. It could be light bulbs blowing on and off, or street lights. There's so many different things. And the smell of cigar smoke, the smell of apple pie when there's no one cooking them. They really try to work with us to give us signs. And so you could ask them, just say, I would love to get something from you, and see if it can work. But just keep the faith. I know it's hard. I've been there, believe me. It's a hard journey, but if you have faith and you have belief and you have the love, then you can get through this life, and then go on to the next, and we'll all be reunited with one another.
Perfectly said. I love it. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. And this has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to the ghost historian, Keriann Brosky. Keriann, thank you so much for being here tonight. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lindsay. It was a great show. It was nice because it was a little more personal than some that I've been on. So it was nice.
Oh, thank you so much
for that.
I love that. Well, no matter which essences of long past times, people, and places continue to hang about, no matter their reason, no matter the quality of their presence, they remind us of one truth: nothing is lost. Information cannot be created or destroyed. Connect with the infinite information encoded in your environs, and until you do, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
Good night.
Yeah. I know all around the world, shit, no one even heard of me halfway around the block. I just got an SOS from somebody's girl, begging for a photograph of my watch. Also know what time it is, I don't know whose mind this is. Snowing in my sinuses, the league is gonna find the kid, administer punishment. Underwater drumming squids, fuckers wanna pummel and toss them in the rubble bin. What a dumpster fire, motherfucking wide. Try diffusing it if your thoughts are living, grow tired. Spin the venom mouthpiece in your mental housing, sent to finish bounties on everyone who's doubting. There you have it, folks. There's the first round. Contestants know what they won. This insanity. God damn it, Chuck. Said tell them what they won. Took a little breather while we took a break. Went to a park and stole a rich kid's cake. Staking marijuana too, bumping some Nevada tunes. Wash it down the clown with some of Svetlana's brew. Who the fuck are you? That's what they keep asking. Kevin Garvey on a beat, international assassin. Smashing like my life's at risk. Caskets for the brightest spit. Rip mics tell arthritis hits. Still might make a life of this. Never will concede my run. Clever with deleted funds. Ever undefeated punk professor of the beaten drum.